Many people self-blame for developing post-traumatic stress disorder. They blame themselves for experiencing flashbacks, nightmares, dissociations. They blame themselves for not being able to put the past behind them, for not being able to move on, for not being able to forget. You might be surprised, but we actually have research that tells us that what determines the most how we're gonna be impacted by traumatic event is the event itself. So obviously factors such as our age, our gender, our social cultural background, they will have some impact. But what determines the most how maybe strong we're gonna have the flashbacks or how frequent the flashbacks they're gonna be, it's gonna be the event itself. So for instance, things such as whether it was a natural disaster, whether the trauma happened in a social context, whether the trauma it was the one-off event or whether it was something ongoing. They're gonna be the factors that they're gonna determine the most how we're gonna experience our life after the trauma has finished. So for instance, studies looking at natural disasters and post-traumatic stress disorder, they've shown that people who had greater exposure to that natural disaster, they're going to be experiencing more severe symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Similarly, studies done on Vietnamese war veterans demonstrated that soldiers who had greater exposure to atrocities, they developed stronger symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Very similar results have been also shown on victims of kidnapping and rape. These results, they demonstrate that PTSD doesn't discriminate as long as the trauma event itself was severe enough and as long as the person was exposed to the event for a long time enough, they are very likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Additionally, we know of research that looked at people who have experienced the same traumatic event, but then they've developed different levels of severity of post-traumatic stress disorder. And in those cases, then we looked at our personal traits and qualities, so such as age, maybe gender, social cultural aspects of our upbringing. So these aspects, they can also impact the level of severity of post-traumatic stress disorder. Some research looked at resilience, for example. So people who have a higher resilience, and here by resilience, I mean the social skills and also the sense of having control over your life. So in a phase of the traumatic event, if people are able to preserve their social skills, if they're able to preserve and use actively some coping strategies, can reduce to what extent they're gonna be impacted by the traumatic event. And here we could think about a specific example of maybe natural disaster. So when people maybe are impacted by natural disaster and that happens in a social context, and if they have better social skills, they can communicate better with other people. Maybe they're gonna be able to help other people more easily. They're gonna be able to maybe help themselves more easily as well in that social context, where someone who doesn't have very good social skills, they might feel more isolated in that situation. The factors that can actually make people more vulnerable to developing post-traumatic stress disorder are, for example, feeling disempowered and maybe having lack of that sense of being connected to other people. So for instance, if people before the trauma event, they've already developed that sense of maybe not having much power in their life, or maybe feeling of being disconnected from other people. So when actually the traumatic event happens, they can be more prone to developing post-traumatic stress disorder because of these pre-trauma factors that they've already developed because of other life events. Other factors that can also contribute to how people they might be experiencing their life after the trauma event are, for example, the social network. So if someone has a very understanding, protective, loving family and friends who can actually understand what has happened to them, who can actually be supportive to them, they have better chances at recovering from the post-traumatic stress disorder comparing with someone who's maybe completely isolated, who doesn't have anyone who can understand them, who can be empathic towards them. Also, people who already suffered from maybe depression, anxiety, they have higher chances of developing maybe stronger symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, comparing with someone who maybe never experienced anxiety really or depression in their life before the traumatic event has happened. So these are some of the factors that can contribute to people developing or not developing, or maybe having more severe or less severe symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. But as I said at the beginning of my video, the stronger determinant of whether we're gonna develop the post-traumatic stress disorder or not and how severe it's gonna be, it is the trauma itself. So although we might have a good social skills, we might have really good connections in society, we might feel really supported and understood by people, but at the end, if we've been exposed enough to the traumatic event, if the traumatic event was severe enough, we will still develop the post-traumatic stress disorder. We will suffer from flashbacks and dissociations. So actually blaming yourself for experiencing PTSD or blaming other people for experiencing PTSD is very unjust. So that will be it for today, and I hope you've benefited from this video. And if you would like to have a look at more detailed research in this context, then I'm gonna leave a reference in the description section, so you can have a look at the book. It's really interesting, and actually it gives us really good perspective of how difficult it can be for people to experience post-traumatic stress disorder. And yes, if you've enjoyed this video, then please like it, subscribe, and I'm gonna see you in the next one.